I always keep my cell phone with me too. Okay. I didn't even ask you. You're comfortable being on video?
Sure.
Okay. I was gonna say we don't have to record the video.
Oh no, I'm
just do
talking
audio.
No.
Okay.
I've gotten used to it. I do some things. So.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, welcome to Unsung Heroes podcast, and I am joined here today with my dearest friend Diane. We have known each other for so long, haven't we?
It's been a long time.
Yeah. We met in graduate school.
Yes. So at least 10 years.
At least, yes. Because my kids are 16 and 17 now.
They're getting old quick, yeah.
Yes. And yours are growing up too.
They are. So we all have teenagers now.
Right. See, when we come back together is one of those hard years.
Yes.
Right?
I guess so. Yeah. Babies and teens.
Yes. So Diane, share with me a little bit about your story and what led you to start to practice in counseling.
Okay. Let me see. So as far as my professional journey, yes. I started I was very non-traditional. So I was the kind of lost kid during the teenage years. Yeah. I wasn't going to college. Okay. I wasn't doing any of that. So what I did is I went to, I started as a nurse's aide, and then I said, you know what, I kind of like this therapy thing. I kind of like the behavioral health stuff.
Yeah.
So I went to community college and got a certification to work on a psychiatric unit. And I loved it. I started going, and I was working down the old Braddock Hospital. So it was a pretty intense unit. I started, I was young and green and going to save the world, and then realized it was a little different than I expected. But I fell in love with the profession. Yes. So at that point, I started to go back to school, work during the day at the hospital, went to school in the evenings, and slowly worked my way. The whole time I was at the hospital, worked through different areas there.
Okay, yes.
And then I went to, I started in the agencies after I graduated. I left the hospital scene, and then I went to nonprofit agencies.
Okay, yes. What did you think of the nonprofit work?
I loved it to some degree because it's an opening for so many people. That's their first experience in any type of therapy or counseling.
Very true.
For me, I worked on the court mandated end, which was interesting.
Yes.
So I went from working mental health and dual diagnosis, drug and alcohol, to working with a drug and alcohol agency.
Okay.
Big change.
Yes.
I loved some of it, didn't like some of it.
It's very challenging work.
It is challenging work.
Not everybody there wants help.
You're exactly right.
That's
and it was amazing whenever you get the people that did want the help.
Yes.
So I did that for a while, and then I started noticing a lot of these folks have the co-occurring mental health stuff.
What do you mean by co-occurring?
Co-occurring. Well, yes, absolutely. With drug and alcohol, a lot of times it's just not the addiction. There's usually the mental health component that comes first. So whether it's depression, there's anxiety, there's underlying trauma. A lot of times there is a co-occurring component that they have the mental health part too, in addition to the addiction.
Okay. Thank you.
So that was the great opportunity, because at that agency, not many people did both.
Okay.
With my background, I said, hey, I'd like to be that person.
Right.
So I went and started with going between the drug and alcohol and mental health departments.
Okay.
That was kind of the start of my journey and my interest there. Yeah. And I hopped around from agency to agency, and I started to get frustrated.
Okay.
Because as a lot of therapists that work in agencies get to the point, they feel frustrated because you have some constraints on what you can do. Right. Constraints on, I wanted to continue to learn and grow and get different experiences, and with budgets or timing, that just wasn't possible.
Okay. Yes.
And I felt that I couldn't do what I needed to do with my clients.
Okay.
There were so many restrictions on how often you could see people and what you needed to do with people, and this is the goal set that you need to work on instead of what you felt in your heart you really needed to work on.
Yes, yes. How did that take away from your therapeutic experience as a clinician?
Oh, that was so frustrating.
Yeah.
It was so frustrating. Whenever I had this massive packet of paperwork, and I had to make sure that I know we really need to talk about this huge stress in your life, but now I have to do this paperwork and documentation and do this treatment plan. So that is one thing I think about the mental health and drug and alcohol system that is hard.
Yes.
And it's frustrating for clients too, because it's such a big deal to come in.
Right.
And then you're handed this big packet to fill out.
Yes. Yes, it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming.
It takes a lot of courage to have anybody come into,
Absolutely.
whether it's court mandated or you're doing it by choice. It takes a lot of courage to sit in that space and then to be faced with paperwork.
To disclose, you're disclosing things that you've never really talked about before, and then here, write it down too.
Yes.
That doesn't feel very good.
No, it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
So how long were you with the agency before you made that change with your frustration?
I was probably doing agency work. It was under 10 years.
Okay.
It was under 10 years.
Yeah.
I hit probably the 5. I bounced around about the 5-year mark, and then I started reaching out I joined a local private practice and worked with them for a while, and just kind of learned the ropes a little bit, learned how to get a little bit more independent, and got the idea of where I would love to go on my own eventually.
Yes.
So, and then I was with them a year or two, and, again, when you're working with someone else, you have great opportunities, but then you always have, like, these are our expectations, and this is what we need and want.
Right.
So at that point, I decided it was time to make the jump, and I branched out on my own.
Yes. I remember seeing that and was so excited for you.
Yes.
To be able to branch out on your own. So you're a private practitioner.
Yes.
And where are you located? How can people reach out to you as they listen to you if they connect?
Absolutely. I'm located right now in Southwest Greensburg.
Yes.
So I'm in the Westmoreland County area.
Okay, great.
I have a private practice out there. I do focus on mental health and drug and alcohol.
Oh, great. So you're doing drug and alcohol.
I do. I do.
That's
However,
rare.
It is rare.
Yeah, right.
So I don't do any medication management.
Yes.
And at this point, I want people that want to get better. So, some people, when they start with the court mandation, I know a lot of folks, that's how you start into it.
Right.
But then it's getting to the point that I want to do this.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter how they start in the journey, but I like to pick them up whenever they're to the point that, okay, maybe this is where I need to be.
Yeah. Could you share with us your website or how they can contact you?
Absolutely. I keep it pretty simple. It's just DianeKerriganCounseling.com.
Okay. Can you spell that for them?
Yes, I suppose that's important. There's a lot of different Kerrigans around here.
Yes.
It's DIANE, Kerrigan, KERRIGAN, counseling.com.
Very good. Thank you. And we'll say that again at the end. I just like to get that in multiple times because I think it's important. Very few counselors do the drug and alcohol piece privately. So I think that that's a gift, a strength that you have. Can you share with me what helped you develop that passion? Where did that come from for drug and alcohol?
Well, that actually is a two-tiered question. I did grow up in an alcoholic home.
Okay.
So, and the big thing that I love to really stress is that the stereotype. There's so much of a stigma and a stereotype of what addiction is.
Yes.
My father was a very smart man, very successmental, and electrical engineer, top brass of the companies, but very functional alcoholic. Yes. Mental health issues that just kind of flew below the radar. On the outside, it seemed fine.
Yeah. So
there was obviously growing up in that kind of an environment that it poses a lot of different challenges that people don't understand.
Right.
So especially when you have that functional appearance that everything's fine on the outside.
Yes.
And quite frankly, the other part of the journey is my friends and family like to tease me because I hated drug and alcohol when I started in the business.
Okay. Yes.
When I started down at Braddock, I went to a halfway house. I ended up working at a halfway house briefly. And I took the women to a meeting. I would take them to meetings as part of their treatment. Okay, yes. And the AA and NA meetings. Yeah. And I remember the one day I was sitting there and I'm like, oh, this is so stupid. And something someone said kind of perked me up. And I kind of sat back and I'm like, oh. And I started listening and I realized, my crap, my patients have more clean time than I do.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it was one of those things that I was at a point where I was, even though I was working in the profession, I was keeping it together. I was not going in a healthy direction for myself personally.
Okay. Yes.
And, I was going in this environment that, I was coming from a place feeling, well, I have the middle class white privilege thing going on here. So, I don't fit in. I don't fit in here. I'm above this. Mm-hmm. And then when I started hearing the leads, I'm like, I'm kind of looking in a mirror right now.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
And it was a shock to me that
chills when you said it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like I got to practice what I preach.
That's powerful.
that, just because I have a job and a car and these different things, guess what? I am going into a bad direction here.
Okay.
So at that point, that sparked a passion in me that I feel that I was very blessed that I walked to the edge of that cliff and kind of looked, and I was thankfully able to turn around.
Yes.
Because with addiction, it's kind of like that door. Once that door is open and you're through, you can't go back.
Okay.
There's not that, I'm just going to have a beer. I'm just going to do this.
Can you explain to our audience why that is? Because I think there's so many misconceptions.
Oh my gosh, it is.
About addiction, and so many people say, well, just stop, just quit. And the importance. And I was speaking on Tuesday night when someone asked me how to help a family member stop drinking. And I was talking about, you can't just ask someone to stop drinking.
No.
So can you talk to us a little bit about that, what you mean, but once you cross that?
Absolutely. It's such a confusing thing because, there is a genetic predisposition for addiction.
Okay. Yes.
So having an alcoholic parent, if alcoholism runs in your family, your genetic predisposition is a little bit higher.
Okay.
So kind of like if grandma's diabetic, guess what? I have a little bit more of a chance of becoming diabetic, so I better be more careful. But quite frankly, most of us can use in a social atmosphere until we cross a certain threshold.
Okay, yes.
The hard thing is that most people think physical dependence. So when I wake up and I'm shaking in the morning, that means I'm addicted.
Okay.
But it doesn't. By the time that you are getting to the shakes, you've been addicted for a little bit and you didn't know it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So it is a psychological change, but it is a bit of a chemical change too.
Yes.
So people don't realize when you get to a point you can't turn around and go back.
Right. But you were able to do that.
I was very blessed, I believe, that I was to the point where I was teetering on that edge, and I saw friends and I saw family members and I saw people going down the tubes, and recently with this opiate epidemic, I've seen a lot of people I've known personally, professionally and personally, buried. It literally lost their lives to this opiate crisis.
Yes.
So the threat is very real. People think that, I have an injury and I have the script that's okay for me to use. And then they don't realize part of, especially with the opiates, with the injuries, once you've used opiates for a while, it increases your pain sensitivity. Okay. It kind of rubs those neurotransmitters raw. So you do perceive pain a little bit more stronger.
Okay.
So even though you may not get sick, you have that you have that drive to want those drugs.
That's interesting. So at that time when you were drinking, was there any anxiety, depression, any struggles you were experiencing?
Absolutely. That period of my life was the tail end of what I call my tidal wave years. One of the things I like to present to my clients when they come in sometimes is very frequently people come in during those tidal wave years where you have this catastrophic series of events that just knocks you.
Yeah, that's so true.
And it's almost like you're treading water with your sneakers on, just waiting for the water to recede and just see what the wreckage is once it's gone.
Yes.
And I definitely, during my teenage years, I had that very functional, that nice house, the nice neighborhood. There was a lot going on at home. And during those years, we had a series of tidal wave years. My family finally separated. Okay. And then my mother had the single parent household thing going on, and there were a lot of other demands. We lost most of our biological family members at that time, series of deaths.
Wow.
And at that point, I started to feel very lost.
Okay. Yes. And how did you find your way through that?
That was an interesting journey, to say the least. I was very lost. I was thinking about this, and actually I have that conversation with my boys now that they're teenagers. Yes. I make no qualms about hiding. I was a great student. I was literally that child. I was a great student till like 7th grade. Okay. And then 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I was still going to school probably till like 10th grade, but I started just not caring. I just, why even care? And I went from being that A-B student to all of a sudden C's, D's, F's. Yes. I remember the one time my mom opened my report card. She's like, how did you miss 20 days? I don't remember you being sick.
Okay, yes.
Those kind of things that,
I'm sure as parents, we have all encountered this at some level and can really relate to the struggle.
Absolutely. And looking back, I remember my mother trying to say, you know, Diane, what's wrong? And I remember just having that feeling, she has her sneakers on and she's treading water. She can't deal with my stuff.
Wow, it's such a young age.
I remember feeling that.
Mom.
I remember feeling that as a teenager. Yeah. And we don't see that a lot of times with our own children.
No.
And I remember she said, do you want to speak to someone? I'm like, oh, no, I'm fine. I don't need therapy. Yeah. No, they're going to shrink my heads. Right. You know, this kind of thing.
That pushback that we always
do. Yeah, exactly. And so I really, you know, I was drowning in that for years. And I actually, the interesting thing is I had then a robbery. I got a part-time job. A part-time job is going to straighten me out, you know.
Okay. Yep.
Barely going to school, but a part-time job is going to straighten me out. So, I got robbed at the grocery store I worked at. And the guy didn't have a gun. He just started hitting me. Now, the bad thing, being that fight or flight moment in my life already, I felt so threatened. Everything was kind of in that tidal wave. Yeah. I decided to fight. Not the smartest idea. Yes. Fighting a grown man that was high, was not feeling pain. Yes. So I got the sense beat out of me, which was not a good thing. You know, so that was a trauma on top of all of that. And it just kind of brought it to a boiling point.
Okay. And then at what point did you begin to seek help, support to work through that?
I actually remember in high school, there was one person, you know, we like to believe that I think that as parents, sometimes we like to believe that school systems can work wonders.
Yes.
And we see that a lot with the current atmosphere.
Right.
And looking back, it does make me sad remembering, you know, I was drowning for several years. Okay. I went from this straight A student to this girl that barely showed up, was always in detention. I had my own in-school suspension booth, you know.
Yes.
It made me wonder, I'm like, how did no one notice that?
Yeah.
And I think it was probably 11th grade. My art teacher, actually, I took art because, you know, I could sleep through art.
Yeah, it's easy.
Absolutely. I could sleep through art.
No problem.
I was terrible at art. I went in and this teacher, Mrs. Baskoff, she wouldn't let me sleep. And she kept waking me up and talking to me and pulling things out of me.
Wow, teachers can be so powerful.
Yeah. And before I knew it, I was they had a therapist come to the group or the school intermittently.
Yes.
And they had a group.
Okay.
And I remember saying to one of my friends, I'm like, you know, I think that I need to probably be in that group.
Yes.
And I ended up in that group, and then pretty quickly I opened my mouth, and the person's like, you really need to talk to someone.
Yes, we're going to refer you out.
We're going to refer you out. And at that point, I actually was sneaking. I didn't even tell my family.
Oh, wow.
Started seeing a therapist.
Such a stigma.
It's such a stigma. Such a stigma. And, you know, at this point, I knew my family members were kind of drowning, and I figured I don't want them to worry about me.
Yeah. Still protecting them as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I started to reach out and do a little bit of therapy myself. Okay,
good. Mm-hmm. So at what point did you stop drinking?
Well, I fortunately, drinking wasn't the issue. It was probably more illegal substances. So yeah, I was not a good girl at those late teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I'm going to say I was probably around 20 or so. The light bulb went on that, guess what? If I don't turn this around and stop this, I am going to self-destruct.
Yes.
So at that point, I really had to do a major life evaluation and realize I really can't continue like this.
Yeah.
So it was probably around that point I got into a stable relationship. I was actually in college already at that point, and I was still functional.
Yes. Okay.
But at that point, I realized this is getting bad. Mm-hmm. So it was probably around that point I was able to just kind of wake up and realize I'm not going to make it if I don't.
Yes. Okay. And what was it like to realize that?
Humbling. Yeah. Very humbling. Very humbling. But it was also a very great thing, I think, because for me, those years that I started experimenting, and then using a little bit more, just partying, as I like to put it back in those days. Those were a lot of painful years.
Yeah.
And when I initially started that, those were not happy times. Those were times where I remember just kind of isolating myself, and my mother saying, where did all the alcohol go? Just kind of like, once my dad moved out of the house, the alcohol went. But there was like this big giant stash, and it just suddenly disappeared.
Yeah, she started to wonder.
She started to connect the dots.
Yeah,
so it's realizing those things now that we see as parents, those red flags, that sometimes you need to trust your gut.
Yes, absolutely. So you go through college, right? And you graduate. At what point did you enter your master's?
I actually entered my master's. When I graduated with my bachelor's, I was 9 months pregnant with my first child.
So made us grow up.
Yeah. Yes. So I was completely non-traditional. I quit partying very young. I got married very young. And my husband was very supportive, thankfully, of, because of things at home. I moved out the instant that I could, even though that was not a positive thing probably at the time.
Yeah.
I just needed out of the environment. And I was in my 20s, but it was after the birth of my first child. So I was when I graduated with my master's, I think my youngest son was, I think I have a picture of him. He was probably about 1.
Okay.
So I have a picture of a toddler and a baby in a cap and gown. So not a course that I would recommend. It was not very easy, but it was worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. My children were very small too. Whenever we were in our masters together, mine were 4 months and a year and a half. I think.
We had babies.
So we had
babies.
Babies that we could relate to with each other. But we were able to go to school and manage a home, and it was tough.
Oh my gosh.
So stressful, right? So through that time, how did you manage the anxiety, the stressors of life? What skills did you develop?
Interestingly, it's fascinating because sometimes when you remove the substances you used to kind of use in those old vices, we channel those. If we don't deal with that stuff, we channel it in different ways.
Yes.
And I learned pretty quickly, I had a thing for alphabetizing that was not healthy.
Okay. So
it was kind of, we were getting to that obsessive point when I would feel very anxious.
Okay.
Boy, it was fun to just kind of sit down and alphabetize. Back then it was like cassettes.
Right.
Cassettes
Do you
or
remember
CDs.
Cassettes?
Yes. Yeah, we're old school.
Right. Not 8 tracks, but
no,
cassettes.
Yes. I would start to the VHS tapes, to alphabetize those.
Okay.
When my son was very little, I would love to go into his room and organize his Legos. That's not healthy.
Right. So as a clinician, can you share with the audience, what is the purpose of that?
Yes. That's a wonderful question. And I see this a lot in my own practice, and I can absolutely relate. Because sometimes when life feels very out of control, we love to seek control in our environment.
Yes.
So we look for things that we can control, even though it may not be healthy.
Yes.
And one of the more difficult parts of that is if we're pushing that energy into that organization or keeping the spotless house, cleaning everything. We're not dealing with the issues.
Right. Yes. When did you begin to deal with the issues?
I have done that at various points, I would say.
Yes.
Definitely, there's been a few different points where I've met with therapists at points. I would say probably the beginning point of my marriage was the time where I had to deal with a lot of the old family stuff.
Okay.
So those major life transitions are times where you really have to look at what you need to do to get yourself through that time.
Yes.
And those major life transitions are usually when the old stuff comes back if you haven't dealt with it.
Right.
And one of the most therapeutic things I did when my children were very little is I finally started to use the tools that I had learned all those years ago. I started to do the journaling.
Okay. Yeah.
I started to do the relaxation. I started to do, I would, instead of focusing on organizing something, I would deal with the emotions and then go for a walk or a jog.
Yes.
So healthier things.
Right.
But it was something that it is a concerted effort. You have to be responsible for that self-care part that we like to, especially as moms, we like to pretend isn't important.
Right. And it's hard sometimes to catch that emotion before we react. Learning how to catch the negative emotion and then deal with it in a healthy way. We can stumble, we can fall, giving ourselves that grace that it's okay. We try again the next time.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Having that grace. So one of the questions that I often get asked, and I think that you'll explain it way better than me, is I have a diagnosis. So a client may have a diagnosis of alcoholism, and they say, I do not believe that I will never drink again. I want to be able to learn how to drink in moderation. What is your theory, your thought?
Now, so that is a wonderful question, because when someone crosses that brink of they are an alcoholic, when you lose that ability to regulate, I see this a lot with binge drinkers. Binge drinkers really struggle with this. So I can't just have one.
Right.
So if I intend on having one and then I have 7, you're probably a binge drinker. So whenever someone crosses that threshold of that addiction, so they kind of, you know, I said I kind of teetered on that cliff. Once you kind of go over there, you can't just have one. So it is a hard thing. It is a grieving process, actually, to acknowledge if you have an addiction that I can't safely use that substance anymore. So it's starting to really look at just for today. And that's where you hear in AA and NA, you hear the things that are cliches, but they're brilliant if you really look at them. That one day at a time mentality. If I think I'm never going to be able to have a drink in my entire life, that's scary. That's totally overwhelming. But if I say just for today, I'm not going to have a drink, I can totally do that. So that's where that mentality comes in.
Yeah. And I think that's sometimes the hardest point for clients to accept is when I say to them, you know, there isn't drinking in moderation for you any longer.
That's correct.
You know, you cannot have that substance any longer. You know, it's hard, and the grieving piece is essential.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
And I think that's overlooked a lot of times by clients. They don't realize there's this grieving that has to happen, and then once they're done grieving, we then look at how do we cope with what you experience, right?
You're exactly right, and it is a very big process that I think people like to believe if I just stop for a little bit and get it out of my system, I'm going to be fine. And I'm going to say 99% of people can't do that. Right. So it's one of those things once you cross the threshold. And that's one of the things that I think if you're getting to the point where you're considering you may have a drinking problem, you probably do.
Yes. Was there any times through your period of life where you felt like you didn't want to live anymore? That you
oh my gosh.
End your life?
Those tidal wave years. I look back and I'm grateful that I had those experiences because it's given me so much perspective on things. But yeah, there were nights I remember crawling out onto the roof and just staring down and thinking it would seem so much easier if I would just jump. And having that and remembering that and thinking and wishing back then that I wish I could just let go. I wish I could just give up. And realizing after the fact that the hardest part really is realizing that I need to get through this, because then I can't have that Phoenix moment. That the Phoenix is my favorite image in the world.
I've never heard of that.
The Phoenix moment where, you know, I will rise up. I've been through the fire and now I'm rising up.
Love that.
So I love that. And that's where that imagery is so powerful. It's like the lotus, you know, the thicker the mud, the more beautiful the flower.
Yes. So in those moments, did you truly want to die?
I wanted the pain to stop.
I think that's one of the most common myths, you know, about the stigma around, you know, suicide and suicidal ideation is they assume everybody wants to die.
And it's not about dying. I remember just sitting there and sobbing. I just wanted the pain to stop. And feeling that was the only way that the pain could stop. And that's the hard part, is getting to the point where you start to really get that reality. And that's where that one day at a time, I started to use that one day at a time mentality. Because I know if I can get through today, tomorrow I can try something different. Tomorrow, if I just get through today, tomorrow can be something different.
And I can say, you know, without a doubt that the one day at a time mentality is what saves lives every single day in our offices.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If you can just get through today and realize as long as you're breathing, you have hope and you can do something different.
Yes. It's that ability to stay in the moment rather than time traveling, we always say.
Yes, absolutely.
So share with me what you are doing now.
Nowadays, well, I am absolutely loving having the freedom of the private practice because I always joke to my clients, I'm going to go off and get some new toys to play with. I love to go and get some new education. I specialize in co-occurring mental health and drug and alcohol. I love doing either or both.
Right. Great.
So that's a great mixture. It kind of keeps it interesting for me.
What age do you see?
14 and up.
Okay,
I typically stick with typically stick with adults, but I do have some teenagers I see, especially if we have some kind of that addictive component going on.
Right.
In the family. A lot of times, obviously, I kind of understand very well that if you have a parent that's struggling with addiction, I love to do, I actually, it's kind of a passion of mine. I do like to do some work with some local nonprofits as far as going out and doing education on codependency and enabling. So I do love to go with, I don't get as much time as I would like to be able to do that right now, but I do go out whenever I can and to do some presentations and speaking for that.
Good. What are some of the topics that you talk about that we can share with our audience?
I do a lot with family dynamics, understanding the family dynamics with addiction. Very often there's the enabling that, there's family members that want to help their family members, but they kind of give them the means to self-destruct.
Right. Enabler.
So I do a lot with codependency and enabling. I do a lot with anxiety actually too because for the addict or the family member, there's so much anxiety and depression going on. My new toy or my new technique that I'm absolutely loving because it's just thrilling to see the response is I'm starting to work with EMDR.
That's so powerful.
It's the eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a trauma technique that works. It's not actually very commonly used for addiction. It's more commonly affiliated with PTSD. But EMDR is a trauma reprocessing that works very well with anxiety, with depression, with addiction. And I'm starting to integrate that into my practice.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
so you mentioned you speak at nonprofits from time to time. Are you willing to go to other places to speak?
Within local means, I generally stick around the Westmoreland County area generally, just because I do have the school age kids. Unfortunately, they're a little older. They don't want mom around as much as they used to. However, I still want to be around. So I stick more out in the Westmoreland County area. But there's a couple different organizations I've worked with. I'm an absolute fan. There's one powerful group called Sage's Army out in Westmoreland County. They do a lot with opiate addiction. So I tend to jump on whenever I see they're doing a good program because they are just an absolute wonderful support for families. So there's a couple other organizations, but that is a passion of mine that while I'm not in the trenches as far as during the detox and during that initial period with addiction, it's something that I just absolutely love, and it's great to give some people some hope and to see it can be better.
What has been the benefit to you for giving back?
It helps you find meaning with your own struggles. And I think that's the beauty. In 12-step work and NA and AA, anybody that's working with 12-step, the 12-step is giving back to the program. It's giving back and really paying it forward to some degree. And I think that's one of the blessings whenever you have had your own stuff. And I hate when people pretend they don't have stuff. Everybody has stuff.
Everybody has stuff.
Everybody has stuff.
I always say, every person needs a therapist. The only people that don't are those who are no longer living.
I love that saying. It's very true. It's very true. And I think the most amazing thing is that I love to see that spark when people start to decide that, you know what, I can do this. I can do this. And teaching people the simple things. More recently, I've been doing work with, I used to think, I was a skeptic of clinical hypnosis for years. I was a skeptic. And I went off and I did some trainings and I found out this is actually pretty cool. This is not the stare at the watch, cluck like a chicken, and it's not the stereotypes. It's actually a very wonderful, it's like that deep meditation. It's wonderful for mindfulness and for grounding. And it is a wonderful component for so many people that have anxiety. Because instead of having that panic attack, you can do this, this, and this, and then work on what you're thinking. And guess what? The panic attack goes away. So it's a powerful thing to start for people to integrate to have so many different things to do and so many tools.
Well, and it gives them that courage and that strength to keep going forward when they know they have some level of control over their own life experiences.
That's the hardest part, I think, about when we're dealing with things that are in our head.
Yeah.
Because you can't see that physical manifestation. When you have anxiety, depression, addiction, it is so hard for people to wrap their heads around. Mm-hmm. So we do have that stigma.
Yes.
But then I think that's why sometimes giving someone some concrete techniques.
Absolutely.
So that's where I do similar to you. I do like to do social media. I do videos and things like that on YouTube. Okay, these are some basic relaxation techniques to do in your home.
Yes.
Because there are wonderful resources available online if you look in the right place.
Right. So people can actually seek you out on social media as well.
Yes.
For additional support.
Yes. I have a public, I've done it like a profile style so people can they can see things pretty easily, but I have a public profile, just Diane Kerrigan Counseling on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter and all the other trendy stuff. I'm a little more old school. But I'm on social media and YouTube. I also have videos just under my name, Diane Kerrigan Counseling, with just a kind of a sampler pack of different relaxation techniques, because I think that's the blessing of getting away and doing my own thing now, is because no one is cookie cutter.
Right. Absolutely.
And everybody responds to something different. Mm-hmm. So having the ability to present that is a wonderful thing, and so people can pick and see what works for them.
Right. Absolutely. What would you say you would want your legacy to be?
That's a wonderful question. My legacy, I would say just, I love that, I always said, I have a blood clotting disorder, so I can't get any more tattoos. So there's a weird blessing.
You can't get more tattoos?
No, there's my blessing in disguise.
Okay,
back in my rebel years, I was loving tattoos. My last tattoo, the tattoo artist said, she's like, I don't know what's wrong. You're just bleeding like crazy.
Oh my goodness.
So I do have a controllable, fortunately, blood clotting disorder. Totally non-fatal, but I can't get more tattoos.
I only have one, but I swear I'm going to get another one.
They are addictive.
Because they can be addictive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a wonderful thing, and they're beautiful. But I always said, if I would ever get another tattoo, it would say, "And still I rise."
Oh, love
so
it.
Just that Maya Angelou, that phoenix.
Yes.
And that's that. But I would couple it with like that phoenix imagery.
Yes.
That's how it connects together in my head.
I am a diehard entrepreneur, as you know, and so my tattoo is I Rise Leadership Institute. Mm-hmm. It's on my hip.
You have your logo stamped.
It is the logo.
That's commitment. That's commitment.
I can't tell you how many people are like, "You're getting your logo?" And I'm like, "That's my legacy. Like, this is my legacy."
The eerie thing is my last tattoo is a beautiful blue butterfly that is slightly faded because I bled. But the logo for my business is actually a blue butterfly that I actually, after a series of pretty difficult deaths for me, I went away to our family camp, and I had these little butterflies that kept following me. I was having a tough time that weekend, and these little butterflies just kept following me everywhere. It was very bizarre.
Yes.
And then I just kind of did the mindful thing, and I sat down and I just started taking pictures, and then it was just kind of like, okay, this is going to be okay.
Yeah.
So in my office and on my website, I have the picture of the blue butterflies that were chasing me and irritating me that day.
Oh, I love it.
And it was just that beautiful kind of like, okay, I get this. I'm going to rise from this.
Absolutely.
This is okay.
Yeah, that butterfly of new life.
You got it. It's beautiful symbolism.
Life. Good. So if there was one person you could write a thank you card to, who would it be?
There's two. I actually wrote a letter to one of them during those tidal wave years when my family had just been blown apart. I disappeared a lot, and I just kind of went off on my own. And my best friend's mother took me in. Oh, nice. I was that just weird, random, the wild child. And Helen just took me into my house, or into her house, actually. Yeah. I went on family vacations. I was just the other daughter.
Yeah.
I was just I was the other daughter. And I still refer to her as Mummy Helen, which is, I'm 40, but I still call her Mummy Helen. And so I've written her letters and said, I would do anything for her, because those moments where my parents were struggling and not able to do what they needed, she just open the door. And she didn't care. She's like, sure, come on in.
Oh, wonderful.
And
to feel that love.
To feel that love. And
value.
I remember she would catch me doing stupid stuff. She would ground me. she ground me. She even said she knew like my family couldn't take anything more. She would ground me at her house.
Wow.
Coolest
She
lady
really
ever.
loved you.
She really loved me. Yeah. So her and that Connie Vaskoff, the high school art teacher,
Yes.
you know, just so grateful. She woke me up. She literally would come over, shake me, wake me up and say, you know, you're not giving up. You're going to graduate. You're going to participate instead of wanting to be, that's the cool thing. Instead of wanting to be in my little in-school suspension booth, I wanted to be in art class all of a sudden, even though I wasn't great at art.
Yes. You felt important. No, that was one thing that I really strive to do is to teach people their value. And she taught you your value.
She reminded me, like, guess what? I can do things. Yes. I can get through this.
Right, right. Wow. So through all of these struggles and ups and downs, was there ever a time where you felt physically compromised? Oh my gosh.
That's definitely been my hardest recent leg of the journey. Okay. And I say it's a weird blessing, the timing of it all. When I finally got to the point, my husband, you know, was very supportive. He just said, you know what, you want to do private practice? Let's do private practice. Okay. And he said, you know, we'll get through this. We'll figure it out. I actually started getting very sick. Okay. And when I was in my 20s, actually, when I went back to school and I was working, I got very physically sick. Okay. I remember, you know, saying I felt like my legs were lead weights going up the stairs. Oh, okay. And they kept saying, oh, no, you're just stressed. You're just stressed. You need to come back. And then mysteriously, I got better after a few months. Mm-hmm. Well, a few years ago, I got sick and I wasn't getting better.
What were some of your symptoms?
Well, I ended up joint pain, joint swelling, severe fatigue. Oh, severe, wow. Like I say it was like kind of that commercial where they're swimming through caramel.
Yes, that's what it felt like.
Felt like kind of like that's if you have a few drinks and you're sleepy, that kind of groggy, you feel foggy. Mm-hmm. Yes. I was having fevers. I actually, and I thought at first it was just maybe I wasn't happy with where I was at my current job. I was thinking, well, maybe I'm a little depressed, something. You know, I started jogging. Okay. And so I did the great race, barely finished, and ended up with a raging fever, and my joints swelled up. Wow. And a giant rash all over me. And I said, that doesn't sound normal. No. And I went from running, you know, I was a molasses runner. I was a slow jogger. So may I rephrase that? Not running. So walking kind of fast.
It's still a very big accomplishment.
It was still right. Yeah. Yes. That's what I like to say. But, I went from there to, I was having trouble standing for extended periods of time.
It must have been scary.
It was terrifying. And I would go to the hospitals and, you know, I would have a severe pain in a random place, like stabbing. And they're like, no, you're constipated. You need to go home and take a laxative. I'm like, what? I'm fine. I eat vegetables every day. No.
You know if you're constipated.
Yeah, I'm like, that's something you kind of know. So it was very frustrating. I got test after test after test, and one doctor would tell me something was wrong. Another doctor would tell me, oh, no, nothing's wrong. You're fine. Gosh. And I kept telling them, you know, I'm like a human bouncing ball. I don't sit very well. Yeah. I need to be doing something all the time. Yeah. And I barely had the strength to get up and do anything.
It was so different from your lifestyle.
Oh my gosh, I was having a hard time going grocery shopping.
Wow, how did you work?
Well, there's the weird blessing of it all. Right when I was at my sickest, that's when I opened my private practice.
Let's introduce another stressor.
Yeah, really. You have a lot of bills, now you can't work.
That's right.
So, but the blessing here is that I now was able to set my own schedule. And an interesting thing, and my clients that I was seeing at the time, we kind of giggle about it now because they know I had a pillow and a blanket like stashed somewhere in my office out of the way, and then I'd see a couple clients and then I'd take a nap, do what I needed to do, and kind of reboot. And finally I did get diagnosed with systemic lupus.
Wow. So how did they miss that with all the testing?
Lupus and autoimmune disorders as a whole. Mm-hmm. This is the hard thing. There is no one direct test for autoimmune disorders. Yes. And that's where so many people are sitting at home frustrated. They don't know what's wrong. They're just in pain, or they're swelling, or they can't move, or there's just random health things going on. Okay. There's no one test. And with a diagnosis for lupus, you have to have several different, it's almost like a puzzle.
I see.
And you have to have several different things come up positive. Okay. And then finally they say, okay, now this is lupus.
I see.
So It took several years for me to get a definitive diagnosis, which was very frustrating.
Yes. And what has the treatment been like for you?
At first it was frustrating because just like anxiety and depression, there's no one treatment. You know, when people start on medications for anxiety or depression, they said, well, why isn't this magic pill working?
Right.
Because it's one of those things, for one, not the same pill works for everybody, not the same treatment works for everybody. And the other hard part is you have to have a ton of self-care. You have to change your lifestyle a lot, which is frustrating when you are even having a hard time going grocery shopping.
Right.
They're telling you you need to go work out, you need to eat healthy, you need to do all these things.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And you can't do any of it. You know, they kept telling me you need to sleep at night, but meanwhile I was having restless legs and I kept twitching all night.
How can you relax?
How can you relax and sleep?
Right. Okay.
So I had to learn to integrate a lot of holistic and natural ways of treating myself. I worked with a couple different doctors on that and researched the daylights, because that's the big thing. Knowledge is power. Whenever something's wrong, research. And I'm not saying let's look something up on like a WebMD or Google and like, oh my gosh, I'm dying, I have a hangnail, you know, because anything can be catastrophic if you look it up under the right terms.
Yes.
So you actually look up on reputable sites on like how to manage this, how to recover, instead of looking at what's it going to do.
Right.
How long am I going to live?
Good advice. Yeah.
And that's the big thing, because I like to say I'm very blessed that I'm now in an age where people with lupus, we can live long, healthy lives. If you don't take care of yourself, you may not. Okay. But if you do, you can be okay. Some people can get into remission. I've been pretty blessed. I have some symptoms, but I'm pretty much in remission.
Great.
Some people struggle a lot more, but the more self-care that you do, you take care of yourself, you eat healthy, you try to, yoga is a wonderful thing, meditation, those mindfulness.
Lots of massages.
Yeah, that's a great excuse to get a massage.
Nights out. Yes.
It's autoimmune disorders are strange in that stress is kind of like putting gas on the fire, because autoimmune disorders happen when your body actually attacks itself. It's kind of like if you have the flu, your immune system kicks in, so your body fights the flu. Right. When I don't have the flu, my body just kicks in just because, and it just starts to attack itself. So it attacks different organs, joints, central nervous system. Wow. It can attack all sorts of different places. So figuring out, and that can be frustrating. You know, I'm a therapist, and I was having trouble stuttering whenever I was very sick. Yes. So that's a very frustrating thing when you talk for a living and you're starting to stutter because your lupus is very bad.
Wow, that would have been so difficult to experience that.
It was not fun, but it's
we were able to do it.
We don't get to dictate what cards we're dealt, but we do get to dictate how we play them.
Yes.
So that's the hard thing.
So how do you really monitor your mindset around the diagnosis and managing life? Because people can get pretty down on themselves with a chronic condition.
That's where the one day at a time mentality comes in again. I swear I should get it embroidered on a pillow. That one day at a time, where if you wake up, a lot of times I've been holding the coffee cup the whole time because I have a condition, I lose circulation in my hands. And a lot of times I notice days like today, I keep a warm drink and my circulation stays okay. It's one of those things that when you wake up and you have a certain symptom that day, you just try to figure out, how can I deal with this today? Okay, my circulation's not good, so I'm going to wear heavy socks and have warm drinks.
So it's about solutions. Rather than sitting in the problem.
Yeah, you can make a base camp of misery, or you can kind of stand up and say, so this is what's presenting today. This is how I'm going to attempt to deal with it.
Yes. For those who may be diagnosed with lupus or feel that they may have some of the symptoms for lupus, where would you suggest that they start to go to look for answers?
Reputable websites. One of the scarier things that I did early on is I looked at a lot of websites, but then I also, there's on social media, there's groups for everything.
Yes.
And pretty quickly I realized with lupus and autoimmune disorders, there are groups that are amazing and inspiring, and there are groups that will make you feel like you're going to curl up in a ball and die.
Okay. That's important to evaluate.
It is incredibly important. I see this a lot with people regardless of their condition, is they get in these different groups or chats, and you have very catastrophic people.
Right.
And you have to really buffer that. If you have people that are talking about everything they cannot do, then it's looking at, you have to look for those people that are saying, okay, yeah, I'm having this symptom, this is horrible, but this is what I can attempt to do to try to get better.
Right. Yeah.
So it's looking for any solution focused places, positive chats, positive forums, support groups.
Yes.
So there are plenty of support groups. A lot of them for autoimmune are online, but there are in-person ones.
Okay, good.
Going to a reputable, finding if you have a specific diagnosis. So when I was finally diagnosed with lupus, I sought out specifically a lupus specialist.
I think that's important.
So not yet, because I think we expect our PCPs to handle everything.
And they can't. They don't have expertise in it. No.
And then also being diligent about, one of the hardest struggles I see with autoimmune is that you're so tired and so overwhelmed that you don't want to follow through and try the treatments or do the tests because you feel like a guinea pig.
Yes.
Because it is trial and error. I was on a few doses of chemotherapeutic drugs, a few different ones, before I finally found the medication that just kind of, I say, turn the light bulb back on. Like I feel like it was amazing whenever I got that medication. I could tell the difference the next day.
Okay. So what you just said was surprising to me to learn is that for lupus, you actually use chemotherapeutic medications. Yes,
actually, autoimmune disorders, you use immunosuppressants a lot of times. And technically, that's what chemo is. It destroys your immune system. It destroys everything. Now, fortunately for me, I call it baby chemo. Yes. Where cancer chemo is kind of up here.
Okay, so there is a difference.
So there is a difference. Okay. So now one of the drugs made me very ill. Some of them not so bad. And it's figuring out, with that drug that made me very ill, it was not a fit for me. Yeah. But the other drug that it didn't really get my lupus in remission, but it was manageable.
Okay.
So it's being open-minded and figuring out. I did tons of research when I tried these drugs.
Yes.
I did tons of research on these are the adjunctive therapies. These are the things I can do with it. These are the supplements that help reduce the side effects. Right. These are the at-home techniques. Around my office, I have things stashed everywhere in my office. If I have a day where my back is hurting, I have like a heating pad stashed somewhere, or like heat wraps. There's ways around a lot of different symptoms. If you're creative, you can find ways of getting through those moments and minimizing side effects.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. Is there anything else that you feel would be beneficial to share with our audience in terms of lupus or in terms of your journey?
I would say, there's that old cheesy thing that we hear from people that we're not going to be handed more than we can handle. And I think that when we're in that place, like we just want to we're like, what do you mean? No, this is too much. I can't do this. This is too much for me.
Absolutely.
It's realizing that as long as you're still breathing, there's hope. And as long as you decide that, when I got handed lupus, or whether, because there was moments they didn't know what was wrong with me. And when you get handed something, you can take it as, this is catastrophic. This is going to change my life. This is going to ruin my life. If you really firmly in your heart and soul believe that and live by it, you're not going to be a happy person. Right. If you're handed something, we just lost Stephen Hawking this week.
Yes.
Perfect example. That man outlived the diagnosis. You look at that. And Randy Pausch from our area, brilliant man in that he was only given this long and he lived this long. Right. It's I always say quality versus quantity. And whether you have something catastrophic, short-term, long-term, medical, or in your family, it's realizing if you get through that, you have whatever, your life is truly whatever you make it, even if it's a bad situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You are truly an unsung hero to us for what you've been through and your resilience to build a private practice. And share with them again how they can reach you if they're interested in services with you.
I can be reached at, my website is DianeKerriganCounseling.com. And I do try to make myself available on Facebook, at least. I'm not on all social medias, but I do have a public profile on there. You can go online and shoot me a message. I do, of course, have just normal phone. Most people don't use the phone as much, but that's just 412-973-4617.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us for the Unsung Heroes podcast. It was great to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Chrissy.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. We're no longer recording.